President Putin's been very effective at shaking that nuclear saber rattling, that threatening, Armageddon. I'm a veteran of the Cold War, and we live with that every day. 30 years we haven't been talking about it. People get scared. I think Trump will be much more robust about that because he was very robust with the North Korean leader. And I think he'll call Putin's bluff on that one. So it won't be as effective. And therefore, Trump will stand eye to eye with him and say, look, if you do continue with this, we are forced to up the ante with you. And therefore, if you've achieved what you want to achieve, which it looks like for now, it looks like Putin might have done, then there may be a deal to be done.
Let's come on to the events of last week and Donald Trump winning the US presidential election. He'll, of course, be inaugurated, as you say, on the 20th of January, 2025. What do you think his approach to Ukraine will be? There has been so much speculation that he will be more hostile to Ukraine, more hostile to continuing aid for Ukraine. And yet other people actually saying that his call with Zelensky last week went relatively well and that maybe, we shouldn't take him at his word when it comes to, ending the war within 24 hours. What is your reading of what he is likely to do?
It's fascinating, isn't it? What a character. I think you have to look back in history. So when he did his first term, three things that struck to mind was he was going to build a wall, continuous wall to keep along the border with Mexico to keep everybody out. He was going to bring peace to the Middle East, and he was going to deal with the North Korean leader. To my memory, not one of those things was actually seen through. So but what it does do is give a clear example of Trump's intent. And whilst his intent around NATO, for example, has been, people shouldn't live under the umbrella of security that America provides, people should pay for it. And actually, we've seen over the last few years, it's gone from only a third of NATO countries actually paying their 2% to actually 2/3 now. So that rhetoric has actually shaken the tree a bit. When it comes to Ukraine, though, I think President Zelensky will be probably rightly concerned about where this is going because Trump at his heart is about America first. Now, every country looks after its own interests first, but America puts a huge amount of resource towards Ukraine. And undoubtedly, President Trump's view is that he's simply backing a war that is not winnable. And therefore, he wants to bring it to an end. He's famously said in 24 hours. The problem is that you can't, President Trump, you either broker a peace or you impose a peace deal. You only broker it if both sides are willing to talk, but they need somebody to act as an intermediary. Well, it's pretty evident to me that neither side is ready to talk. Or you impose. Now, how does America impose a solution? It can probably do it over Ukraine because it has the supplies of weapons and money, and therefore without those, Ukraine would struggle. But how would it impose a solution with President Putin? And it's not entirely clear. I think one of the things that if Putin's objective is to get as far as he can by the 20th of January, he would almost certainly want to clear the Kursk region of any Ukrainians because he wouldn't want to negotiate with Ukraine still holding some Russian land. But actually, if Putin has largely achieved his objectives of land, he'll never give that land up. But if you were now Putin, what would you want in return for stopping the war? Probably lifting the sanctions and, probably making sure Ukraine doesn't join NATO. And I suspect Trump will love to do a deal, and there might be, therefore, the grounds for actually imposing a solution. But as a military guy, that scares me bluntly because, it's like putting a sticky plaster over somebody with a heart attack. It might look good, but it doesn't solve the problem. And the danger is there that you reward President Putin for his aggression. And therefore, where next? Also, what message does that send to the Iran leadership, to the North Korean leadership, and most importantly, to China, who are looking at Taiwan, wondering what they should do about that? I think there are some grave implications for national security. But it does look like Trump inexorably is looking. It's more important. Even his aides are talking about our conversation is less about territory and more about peace.
I mean, it's really interesting because on yesterday's episode of Frontline, I was speaking to Ambassador Mitchell Reese, a former US State Department official, who actually was more optimistic about what a Trump presidency might mean for Ukraine. And he argued that, Trump would be able to bring Russia to the negotiating table by saying, look, if you don't come to the negotiating table, I will arm Ukraine to the teeth. And because it's Trump, they will take that threat more seriously. What do you make of that?
There's definitely an option of that. I mean, I do think carrot and stick, the carrots Trump can offer is around, readmitting Russia to the global world order. The stick is undoubtedly arming Ukraine to the teeth. The problem with that practically is that, as we've discussed on your podcast before, one of the things the West is reluctant to do is to provide its state-of-the-art weapons to Ukraine. Bluntly, because there is still corruption there. The danger is some of these weapons will fall into Russian hands, and technology is the West's asymmetric advantage. A good example of that is the Storm Shadow missile. It's a very, very effective missile, but it's about 30 years old. We as a nation bought 1,000 of them. We've used about 200. We only think we need 300 or 400, so we're going to upgrade those to modern 21st century standard. But we had a load of them that we were either going to pay industry to decommission or we gave them to Ukraine. And even if they fell into enemy hands, it's 30-year-old technology. It didn't matter. If we were to absolutely arm Ukraine to the teeth, which we could do, it would provide a phenomenal capability to Ukraine's hands. In addition, and bluntly, we should be talking about a no-fly zone, because I think that's the next thing that the West could do, that would say, we're not intending to attack anywhere in Russia, but we are going to stop you attacking into Ukraine. And there are steps, I think, that America could do to make life a lot more difficult for President Putin. But there are all sorts of security issues, as I've outlined. And of course, to date, President Putin's been very effective at shaking that nuclear saber rattling, that threatening, Armageddon. I'm a veteran of the Cold War, and we live with that every day. 30 years we haven't been talking about it. People get scared. I think Trump will be much more robust about that, because he was very robust with the North Korean leader. And I think he'll call Putin's bluff on that one. So it won't be as effective. And therefore, Trump will stand eye to eye with him and say, look, if you do continue with this, we are forced to up the ante with you, and therefore, if you've achieved what you want to achieve, which it looks like for now, it looks like Putin might have done, then there may be a deal to be done. I think the other side to that coin, though, James, is also, if you're Zelensky, you'll be spitting tax at that conversation, but you might not have much choice. But what you will be interested in is, how do I rebuild my country? Where does the investment come to rebuild? And secondly, where's the security guarantees? Because after the Budapest Memo of 1994, when the US, the UK and Russia all guaranteed the security of Ukraine if it gave up its nuclear weapons, they won't be happy with a signature, because frankly, Putin ripped that up and in he went. There'll have to be something far more tangible. If it's not NATO, what is it? And there has been some talk about United Nations buffer zones, potentially bilateral or trilateral arrangements with British or American bases somewhere in Ukraine. All of that is to be negotiated, but it's a lot more than simply the peace. It's also, how do you create an enduring peace? And this isn't just one step that Putin is going to repeat once he's refurbished his military capability.
One of the other ideas that's been floated by some people close to Trump in recent days is this idea of having a demilitarized zone, a bit like you have between North and South Korea, between Russia and Ukraine. Now, if I'm honest, I'm a little bit skeptical about that, because who's going to police it? And would Vladimir Putin really accept Western troops policing a DMZ on the border of Russia? But what do you make of that as an idea, Sean?
The danger is it feels like it's a sticky plaster again. Let's be clear. You've just been talking at the top of the show. We've talked about how Russia's not in a sustainable model at the moment. It's pushing hard. It will have to pause. It will have to catch its breath. It will have to recapitalize its military. And what you don't want to do is help Russia do that without making sure that it can't start again when it's ready. And the danger of a demilitarized zone is that it provides an uncomfortable pause. It doesn't resolve anything. And therefore, a lot more would have to be put in place. The very fact that Putin would say, yeah, I've achieved all I want to achieve. Yes, I'm happy, but I don't want you part of NATO. I don't want you actually to have any credible military counter to a Russian aggression, but I'm not going to walk in anymore. And everybody goes, thank goodness the war is over, and they believe Putin. I don't think that would work at all, because he would just go, right, a couple of years' time, mass a load of troops on the border, let's have, the war version 2 and start up again. We've got to learn the lessons of history. And I think this one particularly, I visited Ukraine just a few weeks back. And one of the questions I asked them was about how they felt about Donald Trump and potential for solving this war. And they were incredibly polite for the first few minutes of the conversation. Clearly, they know how much they rely on the support of the West, both militarily and financially, for the war. But when you pushed a bit further, particularly over a beer, that some of that frustration bubbled out, because they said, back in 1994, the US and the UK and Russia provided guarantees around our border security in return for the weapons being given up. When Putin ripped that up, what did you do, the West? What did you do, America? What did you do, the UK? You guaranteed our security, and then you didn't stand by it. They feel betrayed by that. And I don't want to overplay that, because clearly they're incredibly grateful for what we're doing today. But looking through their eyes, you can see an element of that. They're not going to make that mistake again. So they're not going to agree to something which is based on the word of mouth or a little signature on a bit of paper. It'll have to be something more robust than that.
You mentioned, Sean, your recent trip to Kyiv. Tell us a little bit about some of your key takeaways from that.
Yeah, so it was a self-funded visit because I've been reporting on the conflict for a couple of years. I've got quite a few friends who bantered me about why I hadn't been out there, lots of Ukrainians who bantered me about it. And in the end, I went, actually, let's go. I don't want to go anywhere near the front line. I'm far too old for that. I've been doing that most of my military life. And I think there's several takeaways I took away. First one was my parents, my friends all thought it was going to look like London in the Blitz. When I actually stepped out the first morning I was there, bright sunshine, streets busy, walked around, bought a coffee, and in an hour I didn't see one building that was damaged. Now I was later driven around and shown some of the buildings that are damaged, but it's not half leveled as the media might have you believe. I think the three takeaways I took away there, one of which, when you walk around, it's busy, not that many fighting age men on the streets. Very poignant. Secondly, in Maidan Square, they've got several burnt out Russian tanks, and just to remind everybody of what's going on. And in a beautiful city like Kyiv, that was a very stark reminder of the brutality of war. And the third one, which was incredibly moving, I've been to some of the military cemeteries in France, and just the long lines of crosses and graves, and it's just incredibly poignant, just the numbers. At Maidan Square, in a small corner, no bigger than a largish garden, it's full of flags that are probably no more than 20 or 30 centimeters tall. Each of those Ukrainian flags with the name of a fallen soldier written on them. They're packed tightly together. And literally, there's not tens, hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands. There's tens of thousands of these packed into a small area. And I spent 20 or 30 minutes just walking around, sitting in tears. It's just a really stark reminder of the costs of this war. We might see it from a distance, but they're living it. They're paying a huge price for it. And it's a really poignant reminder of just how difficult it is for Ukrainians, that away from the front line, the shops are full, business as usual, but it's not. There's a whole generation of people who are losing their lives and are being touched by this brutality.
Well, just finally on that note, give me a sense, if you can, of the mood of the Ukrainian people, their morale. I mean, they have been remarkably resilient throughout this conflict. And you mentioned some of the frustrations that will come out after you've, had a beer or two with them. What else were they telling you?
Well, one of the things I think that goes back to the conversation we've just been having was I said, what do you feel about President Trump and this solve it in 24 hours? And again, they were frightfully diplomatic about it. But then they said, do you realize we've been fighting Russia for 300 years? Russia's been trying to wipe out our culture, our language, our communities, our infrastructure, our people, our church. Do you really think a Western politician is going to solve this in 24 hours? And there is there's no reply to that, is there? That's that deep centre feel. The other thing I was surprised about, though, which I think captures the spirit of the question, is that when I went out there, I was fully expecting to see firm resilience every time. For example, in Sky, when I've been doing reporting, some of the interpreters have given me a really hard time for being anything other than very confident that Ukraine would prevail. When you actually talk to people, there's a weariness with them. There was far less of we will emerge victorious and far more, how do we end this war? How do we bring this brutal war to an end? Let's face it, later this month, in only a week or so's time, is the 1,000th day of this war. There's no prospects at the moment of it ending anytime soon, according to the Ukrainians. The prospect of victory seems to be fading fast into the distance. And there was that sense of how do we bring this all to an end, rather than we'll fight to the bitter end. And it's only a mood. I can't speak for millions of people there. I was only there for a weekend. It's a dip test. I can come for a lot of criticism. I'm simply saying that the mood there was absolute defiance, absolute determination, but it was a weariness. And they're paying a huge price for this conflict.
Sean, always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today on Frontline.
Pleasure, James.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us